Hey and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to look at the camera focal length and sensor size as well as the color management inside of Blender. So it's really important that you match your virtual camera inside of Blender with the real world camera that you used to shoot this footage. If you don't match it exactly, Blender is going to really struggle to try and match the perspective of your footage. So it's just really important to kind of get that as close as possible. So here on the right hand side in this workspace, you will see some tabs. What you need to do is click on the track tab to go into the track settings. And here we will find some drop downs. So first of all, let's look at the objects. So under here you will see camera, and that means the camera is what we are going to track. We're not going to track an object, we're going to track the camera movement in our scene. So you can leave that as default. Now if you go down slightly, you'll see camera, and if you expand that, you'll also see lens. Make sure you expand lens as well. And here you will see the sensor width, which is the camera sensor size of the camera that you used. And then also very importantly, the focal length of the lens that you used. Now you'll see by default the sensor width is set to 35 millimeters and the focal length is set to 24 by default. Now there are some presets included in Blender that you can actually just click on these little dots and you can see there's a whole list of cameras that you can actually select from here. So if you maybe used a red camera or a Blackmagic Pocket, you can also select that from here. Or what you can do is you can simply just Google the camera that you used and you can figure out what those sizes are. Now I just googled my Mavic Pro 1 because that's what I used to capture the footage with, and here you can see the specs of the DJI Mavic Pro 1, which is the first Mavic Pro that came out. Now what I'm looking for is the lens focal length, and you can see here it says it's a 28 millimeter lens, but it says roughly equivalent to 35 millimeters. Now this means that if we used a 35 millimeter sensor size, this camera or this lens focal length will be 28 millimeters. So that means we don't have to kind of try and figure out how to multiply the crop factor and all of those things. So always kind of look for a equivalent to a 35 millimeter, because if we jump back into Blender, you will see that the sensor width is already set to 35 millimeter, which is kind of like the industry standard. So I'm simply going to use 28 millimeter for the lens focal length. So that's what you kind of try and need to figure out. So I'm simply going to go to the focal length under the lens and just input 28 millimeter there. So this is basically the camera that I used. So it's a 28 millimeter focal length when it's on a sensor width of 35. It might sound a little bit confusing, but when you Google your camera model, you will usually find a 35 millimeter equivalent focal length for that specific either camera or specific lens. So it's very important that you try and just get this right. Just Google a bit and try and figure out the settings if your camera is not listed here. Alright, so with this setting saved, you can just kind of minimize that. And then there's one more thing that we need to change, and that's the color settings inside of Blender, or the color management. Now, to get there, you need to go to the render properties, this little camera icon, and then scroll all the way down to color management at the bottom, expand that, and we're going to change the view transform from filmic to standard. Now keep an eye on the image here in the middle. If I change this to standard, you'll see it gets a little bit more contrast and some details in the clouds actually show up better. So that's just a way to change kind of the look of your footage. It's not really going to change anything else for now, but it's just going to make the footage a little bit more contrast so you can see better, and it will maybe just track a bit better as well. Alright, so that's the only things we need to change right now. You can go ahead and save your project, and I will see you in the next lesson.